managing the chaos of third-party scripts. Thank you so much for joining. I am your host for today. Hello, and this is our agenda. So first, we'll have the welcome. Part one, we're going to talk about third-party scripts and the risk, and then we're going to jump into Script Management 101. We have a demo on how a third-party outage affects your site, any updates we have on script management, and then we're going to wrap up with Q&A. During this, feel free to enter any questions you have in the Q&A tab, and we have people online actively answer them. Or you can wait for the end where Paul will answer a lot of questions live via the Q&A tab as well. I'd like to introduce you to Paul Calvano, our Principal Web Performance Architect here at Akamai. Paul, feel free to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Paul Calvano. I'm a Web Performance Architect at Akamai. So my work at Akamai involves helping many of our customers optimize the performance of their websites. And one of the largest performance impacts that we typically see is with third parties. So it's also one of the for the longest time, it's also been one of the areas that we didn't really have a lot of functionality to kind of help you manage. But what I want to talk about today is going into a little bit more detail about how Akamai's script management feature can help you control and mitigate the performance of some third parties. So third-party performance can have a devastating impact on the end-user experience. Delays and failures are an almost routine occurrence on the web. And while full outages tend to be rare, when they happen, their impact is felt widely. In March 2018, DoubleClick had an outage that affected a large number of sites. It caused their load times to crawl, or eventually the request timed out. Similarly, Core Metrics had a similar outage on Black Friday last year. Now, if you think about that, a Black Friday outage for load testing that you performed would not help you if critical third-party fails under that load. So I want to kind of explore what some of the risks are with third parties. Now, third parties are not all bad. Many of them are critical to the success of businesses, but they can often introduce a number of challenges. One of the first ones is really chaos. So oftentimes you have an idea of what third parties you're adding. Maybe your tag manager, you control all of them with the tag manager, or within your CMSs. But what about the ones they call? So numerous scripts have fourth and fifth parties and beyond. And aside from using tools like mPulse, there's very little visibility you have into kind of what's going on. We also talked about before when third parties fail, you can block users from loading web pages. And then the third risk is not something that we often hear about in web performance, but there's definitely a very serious risk of compromise from third parties, or compromised third parties. And for example, if one of your third parties was compromised, then a malicious actor could intercept user information. They could attempt to spread malware on your site, or they could even redirect users to another page. This is a problem that Akamai is going to be looking to address in our page integrity initiative, which is coming soon. So I wanted to kind of pause here for a quick poll, and you should see the poll in the ON24 dashboard. But how many third-party scripts, or do you know how many third-party scripts are currently running on your site? We'll just wait a few seconds, and then Rachel will show us the results. Okay, Rachel, can you show us the results? Okay, Okay, so it looks like 47% of you say that there's over 20 third parties. The 11.8% don't know, and it looks like about 40%, close to 50% of you have less than 20 third parties, which is really excellent. So let's take a look at some industry data. So the HTTP archive includes statistics from 5.3 million websites. This is an open source database that tracks how the web is built and how it evolves. So we have like 10 years worth of history to kind of look and see lots of different facts about the web. I wound up doing some analysis in the archive, and I was really shocked to learn that almost 40% of websites are serving about 75% of their content, measured by number of requests from third parties. Furthermore, 30% of sites contained at least 90% of content from third parties. Imagine that. You have 100 resources on a page, and 90 of them are not your own. They're from a third party. That's a tremendous amount of risk. So using mPulse, we can measure the impact of third parties. This actually is an example of some data from one of the outages that we looked at earlier. And what you can see here is that during a third-party outage, you can kind of measure that drop in page views, and that's because users are not able to finish loading the pages. So we're not getting a run beacon back, but the user's also not getting a page. We can also measure this in terms of sessions, conversions, revenue loss, and so forth. At the same time, you can also see that the page load times are increasing. So the users that are able to get through are experiencing slower performance. And finally, when users are interacting with the site, we can measure user frustration, a metric that we call rage clicks. So a rage click is when a user attempts multiple repetitive interactions, but they're blocked by long tasks or script delays. Essentially, users are able to load the page, and we're collecting the telemetry data from mPulse, but their users are frustrated because it's incredibly slow and they just keep clicking on things because they're trying to interact with the page. So now that we've discussed how prevalent third-party scripts are and the potential risks they come with, I'd like to introduce you to Akamai's solution to this problem. So script management is a feature of Ion, and it helps you gain insight and visibility into both first and third-party scripts. It works by using mPulse RUM data to identify and measure the response time of script resources that are loaded by your users. This works even if they're loaded by a tag manager, even if the script is loading fourth-party, fifth-party resources, and so forth. As long as the resources are loaded by your end users, we're collecting information about that. Likewise, since we're collecting the performance information with mPulse, we provide the ability to understand the impact that scripts are having on your site. Now, this works both with mPulse Enterprise as well as Lite. So even if mPulse is not on your Akamai contract, you can still use the feature with the Lite version. Finally, what do we do with all of this data? So your end users wind up getting a service worker deployed from Akamai, and that essentially is a proxy within the browser. So you may have service workers already, and this is another one that would kind of layer on top of that. But what the service worker does is allows Akamai to automatically take action based on a policy that you define. We can defer slow or unresponsive scripts. We can even block them from executing. Some common use cases that we've seen for script management include inventorying of third parties. So one of the problems, and we mentioned this before, but there's a lot of limited visibility that you have in terms of what third parties are on your site and how they're performing. So this feature gives you a single view into all of the scripts on the site as well as their performance impact. One of our customers recently told me that they used the feature to clean up 20% of their scripts. We also provide automated protection against third parties. So you may have done, in web page test, you can do single point of failure testing where you silently fail a third party and see how it impacts your page load time. A single point of failure can cause your page load times to increase by like 20, 30 seconds while you're waiting for that connection to time out. But with the single point of failure protection, you don't need to react because we're able to detect it from the service worker and mitigate it automatically. Many customers also see performance issues through tools like mPulse, and they can use script management to configure certain scripts to be deferred or blocked. This is something that you can do within Akamai, and it gets deployed to the service worker, so that you don't have to go through code changes or especially if you're let's say you're in holiday and you have a code freeze, you don't have to go and make an emergency change. You can simply go and apply a change within script management to resolve an emergent issue. Finally, planning for special events and promotions. So some third parties are more sensitive to load than others. And while you can load test your site, how often can you be certain that none of your third parties will cave in under the traffic? I've seen one example of this happen during a promotion event. It was a celebrity promotion event and a timed event. And during that event, the load was so massive that a third-party analytics provider failed because they were unable to handle the excess load. Now, some of our customers actually use the service to proactively defer groups of scripts during events like this to temporarily avoid headaches. So instead of having to worry about whether all of your third parties can support the load, you could you can defer everything except the third parties that you are confident can handle it, and then be able to kind of mitigate the ones that that become problematic as that happens. So now I'd like to take you through a quick demo of Script Manager to give you an idea of how it works. So I'm going to exit the slides, and I'm going to switch over to Luna. And so this is a Luna Property Manager configuration for a site called www.maple-af.com. So if we take a look at one of the configuration versions, you can see that we're going to take a look at the version. Just pull that up over here. You can so if we go down to the if we go down to the default rule, you can see that mPulse is enabled. Right? So mPulse is required for using script management because essentially that's how we're collecting that performance data. Script management is also enabled, and you can see that the mode is set to analysis and action. So what that means is that not only are we collecting the performance information and collecting the information about the third parties, but we also are enabling the ability for an end user to, or for script management to take an action on third parties, whether it's single point of failure mitigation or blocking or deferring based on your policy. So this is pretty much it in terms of setting up Script Manager. You just have to enable mPulse and enable script management, and then at that point we're collecting the data, and we can go and kind of analyze that data and decide how we want to, what type of mitigations we want to apply. So I'm going to click to go back to the property here, and then the Script Manager dashboard is much like all the other adaptive acceleration features, is under Related Apps. So if I go to Related Apps and I click on Script Management, you'll see you'll have a select box where you have to select the property, and then you can view the policy for either production or staging. So just like many of our other solutions, we have both the production environment as well as a staging environment. So you can test your changes in your policies on the Akamai staging environment and not have to test with your production users. So when I load this policy, I can see a couple of things here that I want to point out. You can see that there's categories and groups. There's indicators of whether a resource is a first party or a third party. There's this column over here that shows you whether a resource was a single point of failure at any given point. So was the single point of failure protection, that automated protection that blocks a single point of failure that's unresponsive, was that applied at any point? There's also an analysis section here. For this view, it just shows you how many scripts there are that are high, medium, or low, and this is based on load times. And you can also see a summary of whether an action is taking place. Now, if I click on any of these, I can see the scripts that are being used, and you can see that for the framework, we've got this. We've got these two JavaScript resources. One is called, they're both on the renegade.akalab.ca domain, and one of them is block.php.js, and the other is defer.php.js. Now, if we click on the script view, we can see this in more detail. All of these are sortable as well, so we can sort by action, sort by transfer time or transfer size. So you can see that a couple of other things here that you can see that were not in that group view is the popularity. So what percentage of pages is this third-party resource loaded on? In this case, you can see that defer.js is loaded on 100% of the 100% of the time for that page. We can also see how long it took to load, and you can also see the analysis and recommendation for that particular resource. And you can see that for defer.js, we've deferred that, and for block.js, we've blocked that. Now, if we click the Go to Editing button, you'll see that you have the ability to kind of choose what you want to do here. So in this case, right now we're saying block. If I want to change that to say no action, then I can go do that here, and then I can go and save that policy and activate it on staging. There's also this single point of failure protection that we talked about earlier. And single point of failure protection is essentially timing out a third party that's unresponsive. So we configure that through this with this range limit, and the protection is based on incoming network conditions. So if you're familiar with adaptive acceleration, adaptive image compression, it's similar to that in that we're looking at the incoming round trip time between the edge and the client. And so there's two time ranges here. One is 5 seconds and one is 20 seconds, and this is configurable. But the way that you can kind of read this is that the maximum time that we'll wait for a third party is 20 seconds. Based on network conditions, it could be as low as 5 seconds for users that have a poor network. So let's now take a look at the site and kind of see how Script Manager is applied. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the site. So this is the Maple AF site. It doesn't get any more Maple than this. I'm going to open up DevTools, and if we take a look at the application tab, one of the things that you'll notice here is that you can see that the service worker is this is the first time I loaded the page, so the service worker is active, but it's not running. So I'm going to actually click refresh, and you can see that the service worker is actually the service worker was deleted. So let me refresh this page, and so this is the first time I'm loading this page. So the service worker is not currently active, so the mitigations are not being applied. With the service worker, the second time that you load that page, the service worker is active and running. So if I click refresh over here, then it should load a lot faster. So if I take a look at the network tab, we can see the requests that were loaded. And you'll notice here that block.php.js received a 403 response. And that's a forbidden, and that was received from the service worker. So this particular response never actually went out to the network. Renegade.akalab.ca never actually saw the request. It was blocked by the service worker based on the policy in script management. If we take a look at the defer.js, you'll notice that the defer.js responded very quickly with nothing. And then if we scroll back all the way down to the bottom, you'll notice that defer.js was then fetched and loaded after the onload event. So essentially this was deferred and loaded later in that waterfall. Now, if we make changes in the configuration and we apply those changes and we save those, then you'll see how this impacts load times. Now, There's also an extension that there's a script management extension in the Chrome Web Store that you can download. So similar to Pies, which you may have used for adaptive acceleration or image manager. The script manager extension allows you to retrieve the policy from Luna within the Chrome extension, and then it allows you to actually test changes without actually having to make configuration changes. So this gives you the ability to go and instead of having to push this to staging and test and do all your CNAME change like your host file changes and test from that environment, you can actually just test in your browser to see how much of an impact would blocking or deferring a particular request make. Now, so what you can see over here is that I can choose my production or my staging policy. I can see the time that those were last updated and what they're doing. But then I also have a local policy here, and the local policy is not actually existing yet. It's over here, and kind of we're writing it right now. And similar to Luna, if I expand these, I can see the requests that are on this particular page, as well as what action Script Manager is taking. So Script Manager is blocking this, and if I change this to no action, I'm going to actually change both of these to no action. So I'm essentially removing all of the, except for the single point of failure protection, I'm removing all of the script management functionality from this. So I'm going to click apply to that, and then I'm going to say apply version locally. And now what that's going to do is that's going to tell the service worker that the local version that I just created is what we should use in order to test the page. Now, you'll notice that on that refresh, that page load time took a really long time. And if we actually go back up here, you'll notice that the deferred and the blocked JavaScript file no longer deferred or blocked. And so that actually held back the render time. So this this kind of gives you some insight into what you can do with the tool, how you can use that tool to manage some of these third parties, and how you can really test it very quickly and say, like, hey, I want to see what happens if, let's say, instead of blocking this third party, I defer it. I'll click apply, so I'm actually going to just say I'm going to defer both of these, and then we can just kind of experiment and see, like, what is the impact of doing that? Could I get away with just deferring this third party? Should I block the third party? And then the single point of failure protection takes over for the ones that are just completely unresponsive. So I'm going to go back to the presentation now. So there's been some recent updates I also wanted to share with you. So there's some new features around notifications, visibility, integrations with mPulse, and also an integration with a service called BuiltWith. So some of the recent changes in Luna are that, so there's now a notification on policy activations. So in Luna, you can actually see, and I can show that to you over here in the control center. So if we go to if we go to the if we click on the notifications and I look at the account activity, I can actually see that script manager policies were activated. So that will actually show up here now. We've also created an analysis mode, which I showed you earlier. And that analysis mode basically allows you to control from Property Manager whether or not you want to allow script management to apply an action. So if you just set it to analysis only, then all it's doing is collecting data and giving you that insight to understand your third parties. At a minimum, I would recommend doing that. And then once you feel comfortable to start applying actions and creating policies, then you can take that next step. There's also the single point of failure reporting visibility. So this is something that I just mentioned earlier, where if you hover over that single point of failure, it'll tell you that the single point of failure was actually triggered. But if we actually go back and click on this, we can see which single point. We can see some information about the single point of failure. So this particular script caused a single point of failure. Its slow transfer time was greater than 1 second. You can see how popular the resource is over time. What the transfer times are for the most recent one. So the most recent one took about 10 seconds. The average is about 10 seconds, and the minimum was 9.7 seconds. And we can see that the protection events were detected in the past 30 days. So there's also built with, which is another feature that is that's enabled. So if I go back to, let's say I click on a common third party, actually I'm going to go back to dashboard, and then so if I click on, where are we? I'm going to go back to groups, and if I click on the Google Universal Analytics, should see. Yeah, I'll show you in the screenshot here where it shows you some information about the scripts from BuildWith. There's also there's also an integration with mPulse annotations. So mPulse has a really great feature that allows you to add an annotation via an API. So you can indicate when a configuration push occurred, when a code change on your end was deployed, and so forth. So we recently added an automated annotation. So whenever a new script management policy is activated, it'll create an annotation in mPulse. That gives you the ability to kind of easily measure the before and after performance impact of using Script Manager. Earlier, I also mentioned that page integrity is an initiative that we have coming soon. So page integrity is going to be going into beta soon. So what page integrity is going to do is it's going to use mPulse data the same way that we looked at before, but it's going to monitor and analyze JavaScript resources. So we'll be able to detect malicious and suspicious script behaviors that your real users are loading on your pages. We can also identify scripts with known vulnerabilities that are being served to real users, and we can block those scripts from loading in your end users' browsers. So in a way, you're protecting your users from a third party that is compromised or is serving malicious content. Now, if you're interested in joining the beta, I would suggest contacting your Akamai account team, and they can get you set up for that. So, how do you get started? Well, if you use Ion today, script management is already included in Ion. So, I would say just turn it on. If you have mPulse, if you have mPulse, then it's really just a matter of enabling the script management checkbox. If you don't have mPulse, then you can set up mPulse Lite for free, and then you can turn script management on. But this is something that is included in Ion, so if you have Ion, you already have it. If you don't have Ion, you can take a test drive of Akamai's products. So the Akamai Developer Trial is a great way to gain access to this as well as many other Akamai features. It gives you a 90-day trial access to Ion, which includes script management, as well as Image Manager, API Gateway, Kona, and a few other products. There's a link there, bit.ly/Akamai-dev trial, where you can go and sign up for that test drive. If you do sign up for that trial today, you'll also be enrolled to win a Google Home Mini. And with that, thank you so much for taking the time to learn about script management, how Akamai can help you manage and mitigate slow third parties. I believe we have a few minutes available for Q&A, so if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask away.
Yep. And thank you so much, Paul. That was wonderful. I hope everyone enjoyed his presentation and demo. We will send out the recording to anyone who dialed in and even people who just registered for the event. Now, while you guys are getting our thoughts together, we have a set of questions that are commonly asked, and I will ask them to Paul. Do I need mPulse for script management to work, Paul?
Yes. So you do need mPulse for script management to work, because that's fundamentally how we're collecting the performance data. Now, all Ion customers have entitlement to mPulse Lite, which is going to be sufficient enough to get Script Manager working effectively.
Thanks, Paul. And then, does script management support sites with existing service worker? And does the script management service worker coexist with other server workers on the page?
That's a great question. So yes, we do support sites with existing service workers. The script management service worker will install properly, and it will retain the functionality of any existing service worker.
So we actually have this multi-tiered question from the audience here, and there's about 5 steps to it. So Paul, bear with me. First, he's asking, how do you support IE?
Okay. So Internet Explorer does not support service workers. So the service worker would simply just not run. We'd be collecting the performance information from IE, but there wouldn't be any third-party mitigations being applied because the service worker doesn't exist.
The second question is, do you by any chance know how many customers are using it?
I am not sure offhand.
Okay.
We can follow up.
Okay. And what are the problems you guys face with service worker implementation, and how are you handling those issues?
So one service worker implementation issues. So service workers you can only have one service worker running in a browser, I think the way that we operate, like the way that if in like the rare case where we do have a conflict where our service worker is not able to coexist with your service worker, then the service worker, the Akamai service worker would allow your service worker to take precedence. So the default behavior is that the request gets routed through the Akamai service worker first and then handed off to yours. But if there's a compatibility issue, then it kind of fails open and allows your service worker to still run.
Thank you, Paul. And I hope that answers your question. Feel free to ping us if we didn't. Next question from the audience is mPulse. Well, this is a phrase statement question. Is mPulse Lite enough to get all advanced features of script management?
Yes. So mPulse Lite is going to be kind of sampled, where instead of collecting 100% of all of your user interactions, it's going to be limited to a certain number of beacons per month. But that should still give us enough visibility into your common third parties, so that we could both gain the performance information as well as the visibility of what the third parties are.
Thank you, Paul. Next question is, we have a customer who's concerned about clients without service worker support. What happens in IE?
So with IE, essentially it would operate just as if a service worker didn't, just as if the service wasn't there. So the service requires a service worker in order to function. So for an IE user, they would simply not see the benefits of that of the service.
Thanks, Paul. Hope that answered your question. And then we have another question. Will deferring Google GA scripts and script management affect GA performance stats on Akamai websites?
So if you defer an analytics script, this is so any analytics, so Google Analytics or any other analytics, the risks of deferring them is that you wind up losing some. You potentially lose some beacons. So if a user navigates away before the analytics beacon is fired off, then you wind up losing some of that telemetry. So if you defer Google Analytics in script management, then you may lose some visibility into the analytics data, but it shouldn't necessarily affect performance in a negative way. There's kind of that break between, like, if you defer it, it's going to be slightly faster, but if you defer it, you might lose some visibility. So with all of these cases like this, it really comes down to a decision as to what do you need to do for performance, and is that going to be acceptable to your business.
I hope that answered your question. And we have, man, our audience is awesome today, Paul. Everyone's asking a bunch of questions. We're going to keep you busy.
Sure. Ask away.
So someone asked, does service worker have any impact to the website performance?
No, so the service worker is just it's just a proxy that's within the browser. They're very lightweight. I mean, I guess you could create a service worker that's not, but most of the service workers I've seen are extremely lightweight. And there's not going to be really any impact to having the service worker run in the browser. You can even kind of go into the service worker in on the site, and you can see exactly what it's doing. So if you go to the application tab and actually click on the service worker, you can actually go and see what it's a fairly lightweight service worker. It's just a couple of 100 lines of code, and the real power of it is it's getting that automated policy from it's getting that automated policy from Luna that's based on the RUM data. So the service worker itself is really just how we're applying that mitigation, but all of the all of the kind of meat and potatoes of this is what's happening with the RUM data.
All right. Next question: is it possible to switch off portal notifications for property manager activations? This customer was saying that he was concerned because he sees hundreds of these, which get in the way of noticing notifications from other products such as Script Manager.
That's a good question. I'll have to follow up on that.
All right, we will follow up with you. We have a clarification question. In analysis mode, does it use service worker?
So when script management is enabled on a site, it's going to deploy a service worker to the browser. It's just not going to fetch a policy, so it's going to be dormant. So if you're just running an analysis mode only, then we're really just collecting the performance data, and we're not actually doing anything on it, and not actually doing anything with it. So everything would just kind of be passed through as if there was no service worker.
Yep.
Hey, this is Carm. I just wanted to chime in as well, if I could, on that question, just because I have the latest breaking information on that, which is that we did decide to not instantiate the service worker in analysis mode, just to eliminate any concerns that customers had if they wanted to be strictly 100% in a read-only quote mode. So we, in fact, as of the latest version, do not instantiate the service worker in analysis mode. Just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you so much, Carm.
Thank you.
Okay, next question. This customer is asking, what is the main advantage of service workers, and why is service workers needed? Is it mandatory to script management?
So service workers are mandatory for script management. The main advantages of service workers is they allow you to they allow you to intercept traffic locally before it goes out to the network. So what the example with the single point of failure was that we can time every third party that goes out and then realize that, hey, this in-flight request is never going to respond, so we can cancel it. That's a very powerful feature that you could really only do today with a script management, with the service worker. But yes, so that's essentially why the service worker would be needed for this.
All right. Next question. Can anyone who has Script Manager in their browser view the script, or only the Akamai domain owner?
So if you've got Script Manager, it's really similar to any other resource. It's like how an end user could open up DevTools and look at your tag manager and see what you're doing in your tag manager, where they can view your HTML or your JavaScript code. So because this is client-side code that's being shipped down to the clients, any user in any browser could inspect that and see what you're doing.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Next question, I'm going to kind of parse out what they mean. How does script management work for users visiting the site for the very first time?
So the very first time, and you may have seen it in my example before, but the very first time the user loads that page, the script manager service worker is not existing, right? So if I actually go and just clear all the storage for this and refresh this, you will see a performance impact that first time because the service worker is registering and it's not active. So this is something that really helps out repeat views, but it's not going to. The request would still be impactful for the first time visitor. So at this point now, I've got my I have my service worker, and it's active and running. So when I click refresh, I'm not going to see that impact. But for the first view, for the first view before that service worker is active and running, they will see an impact.
All right. Next question is, how are you tracking the script management loaded in all the browsers and working fine, not impacting any users?
Good question. So I don't know if I have an answer to that one. Carm, do you know offhand?
Can you just repeat which question it is? It's just I've been answering some of the other questions offline. So it's how
no problem. Yes.
How are we tracking? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No. Go ahead, Paul.
So, Carm, the question was, how are we tracking whether Script Manager loaded in all of the browsers and whether it's working fine and not impacting any users?
So before we actually took script management to GA, we did do extensive testing across the browsers that support Service Worker to make sure that there was no impact on performance. So I'm not sure if that's the question.
To the user who asked the question, if you can just submit a clarification to what you're asking, we'll answer it shortly. All right, no worries. This one is actually a follow-up question to a question we already answered. They would like more clarification on the analysis mode. So he's saying that he understands that the data is not collected by the service worker, but he wants to know if the data collection is done by the mPulse beacon and not SW.
So the data collection is performed by mPulse. So mPulse is how we're collecting the performance information about your third parties. The service worker it downloads a policy from Akamai that gives it instructions on what to do with third parties. So there's no data that's collected by the service worker. The service worker is really just a tool that's operating in the browser.
Okay, I hope that answers your question. And then we have that follow-up from the question earlier. He is saying how Akamai / mPulse tracking performance of the script management is not impacting any users. So how is the tracking of the performance of script management not impacting users? Carm, I don't know if. Yeah, go ahead.
So the collection of the performance data via mPulse is done via an asynchronous non-blocking script loader. So it's there's a very, 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 very little or very, very minor overhead to doing that performance collection. It's basically the time it takes for the JavaScript to create the asynchronous loader in the user's browser. In terms of data collection, it's the same as mPulse, where the overhead is extremely low, and the additional insight is usually worth that overhead. In terms of how how the service worker impacts users, well, that's something that we I don't believe that we have visibility into service worker delays, but because of the way the service worker works, I wouldn't expect there to be any performance delays within the service worker. Does that answer your question?
They will send a, if we didn't answer your question, let us know. We'll be happy to answer it. I'm out of questions from the Q&A, so we have a few more questions, the commonly asked FAQ that I'm going to ask you now, Paul. Do you see all third-party scripts in script management?
So we see all third-party scripts and first-party scripts. So we have the ability to, if we go back to the script management dashboard, so it's any of the third-party scripts that are loading, but also the first parties. So when we have the ability to take an action on any of them. So for example, if you wanted to disable all of the jQuery code on the site, you could, and it would probably break the site. Does that answer your question?
Yes. All right. And then what does the colors in the analysis column mean?
Okay, so the colors they're color coded based on they're color coded based on the transfer time for requests. So the analysis is green if transfer time is less than 180 milliseconds. The transfer time is yellow if it's between 180 milliseconds and 1,000 milliseconds, or 1 second, and then it's red if the transfer time is greater than 1 second. And if we look at this in the kind of the script detail, you can also see that where the transfer time here is 3 seconds, and it was high impact. The transfer time was 448 milliseconds here, and it was moderate impact.
Okay. And then last question, or from our FAQ, is what is the SPOF column in the table?
Okay, so if you see a check mark in this column, it means that script management has taken an action to defer what it deemed to be a problematic script. So that was if when we went to the editing section before, and you saw that we had the 5 to 20 second time frame for a single point of failure. That would mean that for that particular for at least one client, a single point of failure protection was applied.
All right, thank you, Paul. We have questions from the audience again. This customer is noticing that his asset domains are tracking as third party, even though it is first party. And this might be more of, it's not something you can answer, but something we have to follow up with.
Okay. Yeah. For a customer specific question, we should definitely follow up offline, and just reach out to your account team, and feel free to loop me into that as well. I'll be happy to help.
Thanks, Paul. So how does script management decide whether the script is from third party or not?
So as far as the third-party detection goes, I believe it's based on the domain name. So like subdomains of the primary domain would be considered first-party. But Carm, do you have a better answer to that question?
No, that's correct.
Okay.
What? Okay. And then
okay,
we will...
I see the clarification. So for base page, so for example.com, if assets.static.com is a first party, how do you mark assets.static.com as a first party? I don't believe that we have the ability to reclassify something as a first party. So if it had a different domain name, it would be considered a third party. But you would still be able to apply the mitigation to, on that per domain or per provider basis. So it's not like it would be treated any differently because it was labeled as a third party.
I hope that answers your question. Feel free to follow up with your account team and get us looped in if you need any more help. And that is all the questions I have for our Q&A. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. That was a really great set of questions. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, and then that's the end of our webinar today. We'll be sending out the recording and the slides in the next, either by the end of this week or early next week. Like Paul mentioned earlier, if you don't have Ion, feel free to register for the developer free trial, and any registrations, you'll be put into a raffle to win a free Google Home Mini. Thank you so much for all your involvement and engagement today. We hope to see you next time on our next Akamai Developer webinar. Thank you, everyone.